In this video, we'll count down the top 10 worst Game of Thrones costumes of all time. Coming up. Welcome back to another episode of costumeco. If you're new to the channel, I do almost weekly videos analyzing movies and shows from a costume perspective, and I live stream every Saturday night. So if you want to keep up with my latest videos, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification icon so you don't miss a thing. HBO's Game of Thrones costume designer Michelle Clapton has earned multiple Emmys and Costume Guild Awards for her gorgeous work on the show, but she occasionally gets it wrong. So I did a casual poll on YouTube and Twitter to find out what viewers think, and from those results I have compiled the top 10 worst Game of Thrones costumes from the series. Let's get right to it. Warning, there are major spoilers for all 7 seasons of Game of Thrones. Missandei's Dragonstone costume. At the bottom of the list is Missandei's Season 7 costume. With only one costume for the entire season, this was not up to the standards that we've come to expect for Missandei's wardrobe. She's always dressed impeccably with her own unique style, even if she's riffing on Dany. But this Season 7 look is a pretty simple, safe choice. It includes a dark cutaway coat and pants, and she's paired it with Dany's hand-me-down Cobra-style leather harness that she wore in Season 3, although it's been dyed black. Here's a view of the harness from the back, and then Dany on the right from the episode Misa. Missandei's costume mirrors Dany's Targaryen-style silhouette, but it doesn't quite achieve the polished look of Dany's metallic gray coat dress that's seen pictured on the right. Design aside, the main issue really lies with aspects of the construction. So the jacket fabric, it's a little less crisp than Dany's, so that hexagonal angle at the opening of her jacket isn't as sharply defined. And because of that harness, it sort of rides up. So this brings us to the worst bits of her costume, which are her pants. Your eye is drawn to this awkward spot of her tummy and crotch, which is not a good place to be looking, and I'm certain this wasn't Clapton's intention. And then the fabric of the leather-like pants often looks saggy and wrinkled, given the odd lacing at the center front. So what I think would have been a much better option would have been to have a back closure to keep the whole look clean looking. Circe's Dragonpit Summit Couture. It's bad enough that Jaime Lannister actor Nikolaj Coster-Waldau compared Circe to Darth Vader, but now she's even dressing the part. So since Season 6, Circe has ditched the red and gold in favor of black and silver. And like a few of Clapton's other designs, this look really pulls you out of the world of Game of Thrones, whose costumes are more typically medieval fantasy. The undergown is made from this chainmail-like metallic herringbone fabric that's available at Top Fabric of Soho. But the biggest issue is with this overjacket because it looks very anachronistic compared to the other costumes in the scene. Clapton is often influenced by runway fashions, and that is what I think has happened here. I can see why Clapton was drawn to this overcoat though. So the cap sleeves, they're very sculptural, and it gives Circe the appearance of having armor because of the high rounded shoulders. This technique cannot be achieved by manipulating seams, but it's likely that the wool was blocked into that shape in the same way that a hat would be blocked on a wooden mold. And then the molded sleeves are then set in raglan style right to the collar. The overcoat looks like felted wool as you see the edges aren't finished, which is the beauty of this type of fabric. Like Missandei's costume, there are some issues with the execution, the most notable one being the puckered skirt. So viewer Asen pointed out that the trouble is with the hem. Either Lena Headey tripped on it, or they had issues hemming the skirt because of the weight of the fabric. In this image, you can see that the hem is flipped up, perhaps from some overzealous breakdown. And also, they didn't account for the crinoline, which raises the hem 2 to 3 inches above the length of the overcoat. And then with no costume continuity, she's not wearing the crinoline when she's seated. Here's the gown without the coat and a close-up of the Lannister crest embellishment, which according to Michelle Clapton was a suggestion from one of the producers. In this side shot, you can see a little bit of the backbone at the back of the coat, which was pretty much lost during the scene. Here is a studio shot that shows you the detail. When I first saw it, it immediately reminded me of the work of alien creature creator H.R. Giger. But it's more likely that Clapton was influenced by this skeleton kaleidoscope print dress by the late fashion designer Alexander Mcqueen from his 2009 fashion collection. Or the influence came from the spine corset, a wearable piece of art designed by Mcqueen in collaboration with Sean Lean. According to the V&A, the spine corset also draws on the rich tradition of memento mori, which is Latin for remember death, in which skeletons and skulls are incorporated into wearable garments or jewelry to remind the wearer of their own mortality. And we'll likely see more of this memento mori going into season 8. The coat employs a type of fabric manipulation like wave tuck pleating or herringbone pleating, as we see on the far left. And the two images on the right are an expansion on this idea, giving the impression of a spinal column. Doorn Armor. What can you say about this armor? Really, it's just weird. Tech website CNET gives the Doorn Armor major points for the pop of color and that the armor also covers most of the body, but as with the sand snakes, they say, the lack of metal plating is a problem. The story goes that Clapton saw some padded velvet armor in Florence years ago that she loved, and it provided the inspiration for this look, saying in an interview, "It's built on leather and padding and velvet, and we decided each stud would be a sunburst on a leather piece studded through. It was a nightmare. I just decided it would be a lovely, sensual way of wearing armor. They were very solid, actually. They were protective." And just to add to this, the armor team had to make more than 25 pieces in total. Here are some examples of this type of armor that Clapton used for inspiration. So on the left is Indian armored clothing made from layers of fabric faced with velvet and then studded. And on the right is a reproduction for the Disney movie Haunted Mansion. It's an Indian coat of 1,000 nails, as it's called, armor made from layers of velvet faced fabric studded with brass nails. Fabric armor was used in India as metal turned hot in the sun. Bernadette and the Handmaidens. Bernadette has been a loyal handmaiden of Circe since the beginning of the series, although she has largely remained in the background, so she's flown under the radar to the majority of viewers. This is what she looked like way back when King's Landing was all pastels and floaty fabrics. That's all changed now in season 7 with this more masculine attire, not just on Bernadette, but all the handmaidens in Queen Circe's court. Even the fabrics are less feminine in this matte brocade suiting. Circe's loyal servant is dressed in a nearly exact replica of Circe's black tweed gown, pictured on the right, even going so far as to copy her ugly pixie cut. Don't get me started on that. And I understand that Clapton is going for a trickle-down effect since Circe sets the trends, but this is a direct copy of rather than an inspiration of Circe's fashions, and I would have liked to have seen something less literal. Circe's black blister gown. I've named this the black blister gown because it looks like skin blisters, but you could call it her grayscale dress, named after the affliction known as grayscale that we see on Jorah in season 7. But whatever it is, this fugly dress gets a place on this list. Here's a better look at it from a photo shoot from the show's official blog site, Making Game of Thrones. Why it earns this position mostly is because season 7 would have been just fine without it. So Circe already has a closet full of black dresses to show her outward mourning for her children and perhaps her figurative death inside. But not everyone agrees, of course. Antares Luna says, "I like Circe's dress." Viewer Tatiana explains, "While I understand if people don't like Circe's grayscale dress, I still like the fabric and especially the meaning behind it and what it says about Circe and her influence. She's a disease and a corrupting force to others, but she's also dying and rotting on the inside, and that's reflected in this dress." This dress fabric is also from Top Fabric of Soho. They describe the black scale fabric as a luxurious, soft, and quite drapey fabric with a scale-like texture. So I'll leave a link in the description below if you want to check it out. Tyene's Sand Warrior outfit. First introduced in Season 4, the Sand Snakes were some of the most hated characters in the TV version of Game of Thrones, and the wardrobes certainly didn't help their cause. When choosing his least favorite costume, YouTube creator AU Packmule said, "Anything Sand Snake really would have qualified. Hashtag Chiffon Warrior." Michelle Clapton defends her design choice, saying this about the Sand Snake costumes: "They're sexy, it's hot weather, it's a very liberal society. It looks too B-movie, but it's supposed to be this rather free place. It's hot and it's practical to wear light clothing. I just like the movement. Again, they wear suede trousers underneath and boots, and I just like the contrast of very light flowy dresses with really tough bits. When you need to fight, you put the tough armor over." This Tyene Sand costume, with no covering on her arms, back, and sides, is particularly bothersome, and it's clear that this costume offers little to no protection. The additional flap of fabric added over the tummy makes no sense to the costume. I feel like this was a late addition by production to hide her stomach or something, but it actually just emphasizes it even more. Also, her tooled leather cross straps look warped, like it got wet and then air dried. Jilly's Tarly dress. Jilly's dress is awful, which I'll grant you might be intentional since it's a borrow from Tala. It's far too tight across the bust and torso, and the sleeves are too short. I actually prefer Jilly's tattered wildling dress. And Tatiana says of this, "I get what they were doing with Jilly's dress, showing how ill-suited she was for Southern life, especially the life of a noble lady, but they couldn't do that with a better-looking dress. Her dress isn't ugly because of how it looks on her, at least not just because of that. It looks ugly because all the Tarly dresses look ugly." Hindsight POV says, "Tala Tarly's dress that was worn by Jilly is hands down one of the ugliest costumes I've ever seen on screen. I'm surprised the director of that episode or the showrunners didn't halt filming once they saw how it looked on camera or demand reshoots." Tala Tarly's dress. If you think Jilly's dress is bad, look no further than Mom and Sister Tarly. Lady Melissa and baby sister Tala's dresses with their short puff sleeves have to be the worst look of the series. With such care put into the looks of all the regions of Michelle Clapton, it's a shame that these costumes, which were designed by Season 6 replacement designer April Ferry, look like they're made from late 80s Laura Ashley patterns. And viewers didn't hold back their disdain for these frocks. Cosplayer Larissa says, "Honestly, it looks as though the designer forgot to create it, so she pulled the curtains off the window and went to town. It's awful." Illustrator Nemi is a bit kinder, saying, "One of the great things about Game of Thrones is how it visually recalls some cultures we already know while still shaping some whole cultural identities, and that applies to all costumes. The Tarlys just look like they're dressed with mediocre Renaissance fair costumes." Aspiring costume designer Tatiana states, "It looks like Clapton was only given 3 days to come up with a fashion for the Tarly women, and she was hungover, so she just threw something together and shoved it through production. I much prefer a bold choice that fails than a lazy choice that fails, because the bold choice means that at least they freaking tried." Tala's costume is especially bad. So because of the narrow shoulders, you can see that this dress doesn't sit properly on the actor's shoulders, and it's puckered at the front, I think from the ridge of her corset. Game of Thrones fan Asun, who is also an accomplished sewer, says, It is a horribly sewn and fitted 80s princess dress with the visible pressed facing on the décolleté. It looks like they were surprised that they had to produce outfits for the Tarly women and had to improvise with no matter what. Nipple armor. According to a CNET ranking on the armor for Game of Thrones, the Sand Snake armor was rated low on the list because the hard leather bodice and skirt may help fend off some blows, but the lack of covering on legs, arms, and heads would leave them vulnerable, particularly to poison, a Dornish favorite. And then there's the controversy. Some viewers thought that the armadillo-inspired breastplate had a too well-defined shape, in a debate that would later be coined Nipplegate. Michelle Clapton herself claimed she was not a fan of the look, stating, "I'm not terribly keen on it. I don't see the necessity for it. You don't do it on men. Of course, you have to have the woman's shape. That's fine. But nipples on armor is almost from a man's point of view, and there is something slightly cheesy about it." Author George R.R. Martin has oft-repeated saying in his books, "as useless as nipples on a breastplate." According to Clapton, it was a mistake. In interviews, she stated that the nipples were part of the original mold, but with the tight deadlines, she wasn't there to oversee the process as much. She said, "They sanded off to an extent, but they didn't do as much as I wanted them to. I had the same thought as you. I was surprised when I saw the picture, but I didn't notice them when I was there on set, and sometimes you can't go back and change things." Mystica Fairy says, "The nipple armor is just horrible. What were they thinking?" But it's not just the nipples that divided fans, but the actual defined shape of the breasts. L.R. Jonte says, "There is no excuse for that armor. Those behind GOT seem to have a rampant breast fetish." Actor Keisha Castle-Hughes, who plays Oberyn's eldest daughter, Obara, was less alarmed by her costume, saying, "It's Game of Thrones. You still have to keep it sexy." But after the episode had aired, the controversy swelled. Castle-Hughes was interviewed saying, "I wore that costume over the course of 6 months, and never once in my life did I go, 'Hey guys, is anyone concerned about my nipples on my armor?' It didn't bother me at any other time. I think it was totally a case of the light hitting the armor in a certain way in that picture. It wouldn't make any sense for the armor to be nippled. And of all the characters, of all 3 sand snakes we meet this season, Obara is the least likely to even have nipples." Marjorie's funnel dress. It's not surprising that Marjorie's structured gown from early on in Season 2, made heavier by the overly large geometric fabric and trimmed armholes, is out of step with the medieval fantasy feel of the show. But Michelle Clapton argues that it was all part of Marjorie's story arc, saying, "From the beginning, she is brave and experimental in her look, which I wanted. She was a young girl who wanted to be queen." Viewer L.R. Jonte says that the funnel dress can be excused story-wise as Marjorie's youthful, horrifying exploration of fashion. And while Suzanne didn't mind it so much, she said, "I kind of liked the funnel dress. I thought it suited the character's edgy style. Would I wear it though? Oh hell no, but this is a fantasy show." Meanwhile, #Sweetener thinks that actor Natalie Dormer pulled it off, saying, "Natalie really made it look interesting and graceful. She didn't allow the dress to wear her." Clapton tells Vanity Fair, "Marjorie's funnel dress was obviously an homage to the wonderful Alexander McQueen's costume for Bjork. It's just felt right that this young ambitious girl would be experimenting with shapes, honing her style skills, which we now see her employing to great effect. It was a risk and divided the audience." Here is Alexander McQueen's Belle dress from 2004 on display at MoCA. Fashion designer Alexander McQueen died in February 2010, just as Clapton began working on Season 1 of Game of Thrones. And finally, Tatiana has a different take on the Outre costume, saying, "While Marjorie's burrito dress was not flattering at all and clashed horribly with the rest of her fashion, I will give it that it was a bold choice, experimental and out of the box. Plus, I do like that fabric, just not how it was used. It would have looked great with Marjorie's more traditional dresses." What do you think of this list? What is your least favorite Game of Thrones costume of all time? Tell me what you think in the comments section below. I have more videos coming soon, but in the meantime, you can watch my top 10 best Game of Thrones costumes from Season 7. As always, thank you so much for watching.